Part 1. The Beginning of Reason, the World Before Hippocrates. Where there is love for mankind, there is also love for the art of healing. Hippocrates. An age ruled by the gods, long before the word doctor became a title of science and service, the world of healing belonged to temples, myths, and mystery. In ancient Greece, illness was believed to be a consequence of divine anger. Epilepsy, for example, was called the sacred disease, thought to be punishment by the gods or possession by demons. Lightning strikes, plagues, miscarriages, these were all seen as manifestations of celestial fury. In this era of spiritual dominance, few dared to challenge the prevailing notion that disease was supernatural. Physicians were often priests, and hospitals were sanctuaries of sacrifice rather than laboratories of learning. But amidst the smoky altars and golden idols, something radical was about to happen. A quiet rebellion was brewing, not with swords or politics, but with questions and reason. That rebellion would be led by a man named Hippocrates. The island of Kos. Hippocrates was born around 460 BCE on the island of Kos, a small but intellectually vibrant place in the southeastern Aegean Sea. The island was known for its rich soil, sea breeze, and olive trees, but it would become most famous for producing the man who forever changed medicine. He was born into the Asclepiad family, a long line of physicians said to descend from Asclepius, the Greek god of healing. Though he inherited the traditions of priest-physicians, Hippocrates questioned them. Where others saw divine intervention, he saw cause and effect. His early years were marked by exposure to both mythology and empiricism. He studied under his father Heraclides, who likely taught him both the rituals of healing and the emerging ideas of pre-Socratic philosophers like Anaximander and Heraclitusman, who began to look for natural laws behind nature's chaos, breaking away from supernatural beliefs. As Hippocrates matured, his thinking began to diverge from religious traditions. He came to believe that illness had natural causes and could be treated by natural means. This belief was revolutionary. At the time, people believed that prayers, offerings, or divine favor could cure illness. Hippocrates saw the danger of such thinking. He wrote, "Men think epilepsy divine merely because they do not understand it. But if they called everything divine which they do not understand, there would be no end to divine things." This, quote, bold and radical, marked the first recorded effort to separate medicine from superstition, early practice, and observation. Hippocrates traveled widely across Thrace, Thessaly, and even into the Persian Empire studying diseases, climates, and cultures. He observed that people in marshy areas suffered different illnesses than those in dry regions. He noted how seasonal changes affected health. He paid attention to diet, sleep, and environment. These observations would lay the groundwork for what we now call clinical medicine. Rather than treating all patients with the same ritual or formula, he encouraged case-by-case observation. Every patient, he believed, was different. Their symptoms, histories, environments, and responses to treatment should all be studied. The four humors, a framework for balance. Hippocrates introduced what would become the cornerstone of ancient Western medicine, the theory of the four humors. According to this theory, the human body was composed of four fundamental fluids: blood, associated with vitality, spring, and air; phlegm, linked to calmness, winter, and water; yellow bile, tied to anger, summer, and fire; black bile, connected to melancholy, autumn, and earth. Health, he argued, was a state of equilibrium among these humors. Disease occurred when one humor became dominant or deficient. Treatment, therefore, aimed to restore balance, often through diet, exercise, bleeding, or purging. Though the theory is now obsolete, it offered a systematic, rational approach to understanding the body and marked a crucial step away from supernatural explanations. The moral code of a physician. Perhaps Hippocrates' most enduring contribution is not in science, but in ethics. He established a code of conduct for physicians that emphasized compassion, confidentiality, and doing no harm. This code would later be known as the Hippocratic Oath. Though its modern version has evolved, the original laid the foundation for medical ethics, with statements such as, "I will use treatment to help the sick, according to my ability and judgment, but never with a view to injury or wrongdoing. Whatever I see or hear in the lives of my patients, I will keep secret, as considering all such things to be private." This was a radical idea in a time when physicians could easily exploit the vulnerable. The Corpus Hippocraticum, while the exact authorship is debated, Hippocrates is credited with inspiring a body of texts known as the Corpus Hippocraticum, collection of around 60 medical works written in Ionic Greek. These texts include On Airs, Waters, and Places, linking health to geography and environment, Prognostics, outlining symptom patterns and disease progressions, Aphorisms, short clinical observations, many still quoted today, The Sacred Disease, debunking the divine origin of epilepsy. These texts, pragmatic and observational, shifted medicine into an evidence-based discipline, a life of simplicity and purpose. Hippocrates lived a humble, disciplined life. He dressed plainly, avoided politics, and remained focused on his mission, to understand and relieve human suffering. He was known for walking great distances to reach patients, for accepting no bribes, and for refusing to treat incurable cases dishonestly. He lived to nearly 90 years old, an extraordinary age at the time, and his teachings continued to spread across Greece and Rome even, influencing great minds like Galen centuries later. Legacy across centuries. Hippocrates' ideas outlived him by millennia. During the Renaissance, his works were revived and translated. In modern medical schools, his teachings still echo through medical oaths and ethics courses, case-based diagnostic training, preventive medicine principles. His influence crosses boundaries of time, language, and geography. Even today, when a patient trusts their doctor, when a doctor acts with honor, when observation guides treatment, Hippocrates lives on. Part 2. The Island of Kos, Cradle of Rational Medicine. Medicine is, of all the arts, the most noble. Hippocrates, a fertile ground for inquiry, the island of Kos, resting in the sun-drenched embrace of the Aegean Sea, was more than just the birthplace of Hippocrates. It was a sanctuary of emerging thought, a place where ancient traditions clashed with the murmurs of rationalism. Kos, though small in size, sat at a crossroads of civilizations. Just a short sail from the coast of Asia Minor, it had absorbed influences from the Ionian philosophers, Egyptian medical lore, and the mystical rites of the Near East. The result was a culture steeped in healing but ready for evolution. From the age of infancy, Hippocrates was surrounded by a duality: sacred rituals performed by priests in the temples of Asclepius, and questions whispered by travelers and thinkers who debated natural causes behind thunder, tides, and disease. This fertile intellectual climate would nurture the seeds of skepticism and science in the young boy's mind. The Asclepiad tradition? Hippocrates was born into the Asclepiads, a revered family of healers who claimed divine descent from Asclepius, the god of medicine. Their practice combined herbal treatments with religious offerings, dream interpretation, and temple sleep rituals known as incubation. These early experiences taught Hippocrates the techniques of medicine, but also exposed him to the limitations of superstition. He would later write that the gods have no need for incense, subtly challenging the mystical practices that govern temple healing. Rather than reject his roots, Hippocrates absorbed them, studied them, and refined them. He turned inherited wisdom into applied knowledge. The art of healing, in his hands, would become a discipline rather than a faith. The school of Kos As he matured, Hippocrates began teaching and practicing on his home island, transforming Kos into a beacon of medical learning. The school of Kos, whether a physical institution or a loose network of like-minded healers, considered the earliest center for rational medicine in the Western world. Here, medicine was no longer based solely on divine interpretation, but on patient observation, lifestyle analysis, geographical and environmental studies, longitudinal tracking of symptoms and outcomes. Students came from across the Mediterranean to learn from Hippocrates. They didn't memorize prayers. They learned to observe, record, question, and hypothesize a framework strikingly similar to today's scientific method. Case studies and clinical notes. One of Hippocrates' enduring legacies was his methodical record-keeping. He emphasized detailed documentation of each patient's history, symptoms, pulse, temperature, color, pain, and recovery. This was revolutionary. Most physicians of the time based their work on generalized concepts or divine judgment. Hippocrates believed that no two patients were alike and that good medicine demanded individualized study. In one case, his notes described a man who developed chills, followed by a red rash, then delirium. Hippocrates tracked the fever's daily progression and observed when the crisis passed, concluding that the seventh day marked a critical turning point. From this, he developed the idea of crisis days in illness, a concept that remained influential for centuries. Medicine and environment. In his treatise on airs, waters, and places, Hippocrates argued that environmental factors affect health. He suggested that physicians should consider the direction of the winds, the quality of the water, the changing of the seasons, the geography and elevation of a town, the diet and habits of the inhabitants. He believed a doctor should study a city before ever treating its people. Whoever wishes to investigate medicine properly, he wrote, should consider the seasons of the year, the winds, the qualities of the waters, the behavior of the people, and the common diseases of each region. This idea that health is tied to external conditions was radically modern and a precursor to public health, epidemiology, and preventative care. The integrated physician. At the school of Kos, Hippocrates trained not just physicians, but holistic thinkers. He emphasized that a doctor must understand the mind and emotions of the patient, the role of sleep, nutrition, and lifestyle, the cultural beliefs that shaped patient expectations. He discouraged the use of harsh treatments and advocated, "Let food be thy medicine," an idea that remains relevant in modern holistic and nutritional medicine. More importantly, Hippocrates demanded ethical conduct. He told students, "Cure sometimes, treat often, comfort always." It wasn't enough to diagnose, the physician must care. Confronting the mystics. Despite his growing popularity, Hippocrates faced resistance from priest-physicians and mystics. They saw his empirical methods as a threat to tradition and power. But Hippocrates never openly ridiculed them. Instead, he silently outperformed them. His methods produced better outcomes, more consistent recoveries, and a growing number of patients who sought logic over ritual. His most defiant blow against superstition came in The Sacred Disease, where he declared, "It is my opinion that the disease called sacred is no more divine than other diseases. It has a natural cause just like other afflictions." This was intellectual heresy in its time and the moment where medicine truly parted ways with divine judgment. Building a model for future generations, by the later decades of his life, Hippocrates had helped transform Kos into the most respected medical center in the ancient world. His approach to healing combined empirical observation, personal ethics, environmental awareness, case-based analysis. He trained dozens, perhaps hundreds, of students who would carry his legacy across Greece and beyond. The school of Kos didn't die with him. It evolved into a model for Roman physicians, Arabic scholars, and eventually Renaissance doctors who would rediscover his texts. A reputation beyond his time. Long before his death, Hippocrates' name had spread throughout the ancient Mediterranean. Patients traveled days or even weeks to seek his consultation. Leaders and aristocrats sent emissaries with letters begging for his advice. But Hippocrates remained grounded. He continued living simply, walking among his patients and teaching. He refused to accept money from those who couldn't afford it. In the fading light of the Aegean sun, he never claimed to be a prophet or geniusly a man committed to alleviating human suffering. His motto was not dominance, but devotion. Part 3. The Four Humors, a model of balance. Health is a state of harmony. When the body's elements are in balance, disease cannot take root. Interpreted from Hippocratic principles, an early framework for the body, before the discovery of organs, bacteria, or hormones, Hippocrates sought to understand the human body using the tools available in his time: observation, analogy, and logical deduction. He noticed that patients' bodily discharges blood, vomit, urine, sweat, bile varied in color, texture, and frequency during illness. From these observations, he developed one of the earliest physiological models in history, the theory of the four humors. Though incorrect by modern standards, this theory gave structure to diagnosis and treatment for over 1,000 years. It was not just a scientific proposition, it was a philosophy of equilibrium, describing the health of the body as a mirror of nature's balance. The four essential fluids. Hippocrates proposed that the body was governed by four main bodily fluids, humors, each associated with an element of nature and a temperament of the human mind. Blood, element; air, season, spring; organ, heart, temperament, sanguine, cheerful, optimistic, social; imbalance effects, nosebleeds, fever, liveliness, or mania. Phlegm, element, water; season, winter; organ, brain and lungs; temperament, phlegmatic, calm, thoughtful, reserved; imbalance effects, lethargy, congestion, slow digestion; yellow bile; element, fire; season, summer; organ, liver; temperament, choleric, ambitious, aggressive, restless; imbalance effects, anger, jaundice, ulcers; black bile; element, earth; season, autumn; organ, spleen; temperament, melancholic, sad, introspective, anxious; imbalance effects, depression, digestive disorders, dark thoughts. This system connected the body, mind, and cosmos, a holistic view of health that integrated physical and psychological wellness centuries before psychosomatic medicine existed. Diagnosis through humoral signs. In Hippocratic medicine, diagnosis was a matter of interpreting signs of humor imbalance. The physician became an investigator of fluid sexa, meaning urine for cloudiness, color, sediment; stool for texture, frequency; sweat for odor and volume; vomit for color and taste; fever as a sign of rising bile. These bodily observations allowed doctors to determine which humor was out of proportion and how it could be restored to balance. For example, a patient with a high fever, restlessness, and sharp temperament was believed to have an excess of yellow bile. Treatment would then aim to reduce heat and promote cooling through water, herbs, or bleeding. Treatment through balance. Hippocratic treatments were rooted in the idea of restoring equilibrium, not eliminating disease. If illness arose from excess, the cure was removal. If it came from deficiency, the cure was nourishment. Some common treatments included bloodletting, to reduce blood in cases of fever or inflammation; emetics, to purge bile through vomiting; laxatives, to eliminate black bile; diet regulation, warm foods for cold patients, cold foods for hot; bathing and massage, to restore physical and emotional balance. But Hippocrates was also cautious. He warned against overtreatment and emphasized the healing power of nature and time. He believed the body had an innate ability to recover, and the physician's role was to support, not interfere with that process. Personhood and temperament. The four humors were not limited to the body, they extended to personality. In Hippocratic thought, each person's temperament reflected their dominant humor. This psychological interpretation influenced centuries of medicine, literature, and philosophy. It shaped how people saw themselves, how rulers governed, and even how lovers described each other. Sanguine people were friendly, fun-loving, spontaneous. Phlegmatic types were peaceful, reliable, slow to anger. Choleric individuals were bold, energetic, dominant. Melancholics were reflective, sensitive, putic. Though simplistic by modern psychological standards, this model was one of the first attempts to link mind and body, suggesting that our health, personality, and emotions are deeply intertwined. Humoral theory in practice. Physicians trained in the Hippocratic tradition used the four humors to tailor treatments to individual constitutions, predict how different patients would respond to seasons or foods, advise preventive measures such as avoiding certain climates or diets, explain mental disorders in terms of physical imbalances. This humoral lens became so dominant that even centuries later, Roman, Islamic, and Renaissance physicians like Galen, Avicenna, and Paracelsus continued to refine and expand it. Limitations and lasting influence. Though groundbreaking, the four humors theory had serious limitations. Without access to modern anatomy, microscopy, or germ theory, it couldn't explain infectious diseases, cancer, or genetic disorders. Yet, its value wasn't in its literal correctness, but in its systematic thinking. It encouraged doctors to look holistically, to consider environment, lifestyle, emotion, and individuality in treatment. Even in modern practice, we still talk about balancing the system, clearing toxins, listening to the body, mind-body connection. These ideas, though now grounded in biology and neuroscience, trace a philosophical lineage back to Hippocrates. Chapter 8, From Science to Symbol. Over time, the four humors became more than a medical tool. They became cultural symbols. Writers like Shakespeare used them to describe characters. Renaissance painters used them to depict human moods. Astrologers connected them to zodiac signs. The model outlived its scientific accuracy, but survived as a language of the Sula way for humans to describe their inner worlds in a time before modern psychology. Chapter 9. A Legacy of Balance. In a world increasingly obsessed with precision, Hippocrates' four humors remind us of an ancient truth, that health is not the absence of disease, but a state of harmony within ourselves, with others, and with the natural world. Though science has moved on, the Hippocratic vision of balance continues to inspire medicine, philosophy, and the enduring dream of healing with wisdom and compassion. Part 4. The Sacred Disease, a Manifesto of Rational Medicine. It is thus with regard to the disease called sacred. It appears to me to be in no way more divine nor more sacred than other diseases. From On the Sacred Disease, Hippocrates. Epilepsy, the god's whim? In the ancient Greek world, few conditions inspired more fear than epilepsy. The sudden convulsions, the loss of consciousness, the rigid limbs, the frothing mouthit, seemed as if the afflicted were seized by invisible forces. The Greeks, lacking anatomical knowledge, attributed this violent affliction to divine punishment or possession. They called it the sacred diseasia, name reflecting both its fearsome mystery and religious significance. Many believed it was a curse from the gods, particularly from Artemis or Hades. Victims were treated not with medicine, but with incantations, sacrifices, and purifications. Enter Hippocrates, a radical voice in medicine. In his groundbreaking treatise On the Sacred Disease, Hippocrates dismantled the mystical theories of epilepsy with methodical precision. He didn't just offer a new medical perspective, he delivered a philosophical strike against the foundation of spiritual medicine. He opened the text with audacity. It is my opinion that the disease called sacred is no more divine than other diseases, but has a natural cause. With these words, Hippocrates rejected centuries of religious interpretation. He claimed that epilepsy was caused by problems in the brain, particularly due to phlegm obstructing the cerebral vessels, a theory based on the four humors model. While his anatomical accuracy was limited, the importance of his statement lay not in what he got wrong, but in what he dared to suggest, that the brain, not the gods, controlled the body. The brain as the center of thought. Hippocrates' statement that the brain is the seat of intelligence, emotion, and movement was monumental. At the time, most thinkers, including Aristotle later on, believed that the heart was the center of thought. Hippocrates argued otherwise. He stated, "Men ought to know that from the brain, and from the brain only, arise our pleasures, joys, laughter, and jests, as well as our sorrows, griefs, despondency, and lamentations." This declaration was more than metacolic, was revolutionary neuroscience, long before the field even existed. Demystifying disease. Through his writing in On the Sacred Disease, Hippocrates constructed a framework for all illness, not just epilepsy. Disease is not divine punishment, but natural imbalance. The body is a system that can be observed, studied, and understood. Medical practice should be based on evidence, not rituals. Physicians must treat all patients with rational care, not fear-driven responses. This was a manifesto for naturalistic medicine, where disease was no longer feared but approached with reason. Rebuke to priest-physicians. Hippocrates directly criticized temple healers who used superstition to manipulate patients. He accused them of using mystery and myth to gain power, stating that when their rituals failed, they blamed the patient's impurity or lack of faith. He wrote, "These are the methods of charlatans who veil their ignorance with religious pretenses." His words were not merely observations, they were an ethical condemnation. He saw the damage inflicted by blind superstition, and he positioned the physician not as a mystic, but as a servant of logic and humanity. Impact beyond epilepsy. Though On the Sacred Disease centered on epilepsy, its rational tone spread to broader areas of Hippocratic medicine. It inspired generations of doctors to seek natural explanations for symptoms, prioritize observation over myth, advocate for human dignity in the face of suffering, study the brain as a functional organ, not just symbolic matter. This treatise influenced later anatomists, from Herophilos in Alexandria to Galen in Rome, and eventually helped inspire the scientific revolution of the Renaissance. Public response and private courage. Writing against divine dogma in ancient Greece was not without risk. Though not punished by the state, Hippocrates risked social and spiritual ostracism by confronting deeply entrenched religious practices. But his reputation as a healer grew so strong, and his results so undeniable, that even critics could not ignore his success. He became known as the wise physician who defied the gods yet saved lives. His courage to question, to doubt, and to base conclusions on reason marked him not only as a physician but as a philosopher of medicine, foreshadowing modern medical ethics. In denouncing the manipulation of religion in healing, Hippocrates was also advocating for patient autonomy, truthful diagnosis, and ethical treatment. These ideals would echo centuries later in the Enlightenment's demand for secular science, the formation of hospitals free from religious control, the establishment of neurological science, the modern movement for mental health destigmatization. Hippocrates did not just demystify epilepsy, he changed how we view all illness, especially those affecting the mind. Epilogue: the real sacred act. Hippocrates taught that what was truly sacred was not disease, but the act of healing. The sacred moment was not when a priest chanted over an altar, but when a doctor sat beside the sick, observed their pain, and worked to understand it. He transformed healing from a religious privilege into a moral responsibility, and in doing so, he forever shifted the foundation of medicine from the gods to the hands of human understanding. Part 5. The Hippocratic Oath, the birth of medical ethics. First, do no harm, a phrase rooted in Hippocratic tradition, the need for an ethical foundation. In the world before Hippocrates, medicine was largely unregulated. Physicians were sometimes priests, sometimes traveling healers, and at times outright frauds. There was no professional code, no formal boundary between charlatan and caregiver. Some healers exploited patients with unproven rituals, took bribes, administered poisons, or abandoned the terminally ill. Others offered cures for diseases they could neither explain nor treat. Hippocrates saw a need for something greater than mere technikia, moral compass, a pledge of conduct that would distinguish a true physician from opportunists. Thus, he, or more likely his school, introduced what would become one of the most enduring texts in the history of medicine, the Hippocratic Oath. Origins and structure. The exact authorship of the Hippocratic Oath is debated, but it is widely accepted to have emerged from the school of Kos under the intellectual and ethical influence of Hippocrates himself. Written in Ionic Greek, the original oath consisted of several key components: invocation to the gods, acknowledging divine witnesses, commitment to teachers and their families, promise to apply treatments for the benefit of the sick, refusal to give poison or perform abortions, obligation to live a pure and pious life, vow of confidentiality, recognition of the limits of knowledge. Though later versions were secularized, this structure provided a comprehensive ethical framework for medical conduct unprecedented in ancient society. Do no harm. One of the most famous phrases associated with Hippocrates is primum non nocere, first, do no harm. While this exact wording doesn't appear in the original Greek oath, the spirit of the phrase is central to its message. The Hippocratic Oath was not just about curing illness, it was about avoiding injury. It established that physicians must never use their knowledge to kill. Treatment must aim at relief and not experimentation at the patient's expense. Harm includes neglect, overtreatment, and carelessness. This principle became a cornerstone of modern medical ethics. A doctor's responsibilities. The oath emphasized the physician's duty to others, including to teachers. Treat them as parents. Pass on knowledge freely. To patients. Act for their good. Preserve life. Maintain dignity. To the profession. Uphold standards. Protect the field from corruption. To society. Be a moral figure, not just a technician. Such concepts introduce the idea of medicine as a vocation, not just a trade, but a sacred responsibility to the human condition. Confidentiality and respect. Perhaps most visionary was the oath's insistence on patient confidentiality. Whatever I see or hear in the lives of my patients, I will keep secret. This marked the first recorded ethical recognition of patient privacy. It reinforced the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship, a space of trust, intimacy, and vulnerability. Even now, medical confidentiality laws trace their origin to this simple yet powerful promise. Controversial prohibitions. The original Hippocratic Oath forbade administering poison, performing abortions, surgery reserved for specialists. These clauses were deeply influenced by cultural and philosophical norms of the time. While modern medicine has evolved in interpreting these prohibitions, the key idea remains: the physician must not abuse power. The ethical debates these lines sparked continue to this day on euthanasia, reproductive rights, and scope of practice proving the enduring relevance of Hippocrates' ethical inquiries. The oath in history. The Hippocratic Oath survived the fall of Greek city-states, the Roman conquest, and the Christianization of Europe. It was copied by Islamic physicians like Avicenna, preserved in monasteries, and revived in the Renaissance. During the Enlightenment, its rational and moral tone was embraced by modern medicine, and by the 20th century, medical schools around the world adopted modified versions of the oath for graduating physicians. Some key milestones. Modern revisions in the 20th century removed religious references and adapted the text for democratic, secular societies. The Declaration of Geneva, 1948, by the World Medical Association was heavily inspired by the oath. Nearly all doctors today still take some form of professional oath, often based on the Hippocratic version, a universal standard. Though the original text may appear dated, its principles are universal. Compassion over profit, confidentiality over curiosity, integrity over fame, learning over arrogance, service over self-interest. These ideas still form the bedrock of ethical medical practice in every culture and healthcare system. Hippocrates offered a moral architecture that transcended borders and epochs. The oath in modern context. Today, physicians face challenges Hippocrates could never have imagined: genetic editing, artificial intelligence, global pandemics. Yet, the Hippocratic spirit remains relevant. When doctors weigh life-saving interventions against potential harm, they ask, "Am I helping or hurting?" When confidentiality is breached, ethics boards ask, "Was trust violated?" When medical students graduate, they are reminded, "Your duty is first to the patient, not the system." The Hippocratic Oath continues to be more than a tradition. It is a guiding light in an ever-changing world. A timeless legacy. Thousands of years have passed since Hippocrates walked the island of Kos. Yet, in hospitals from Boston to Bangkok, in clinics from Tokyo to Tunis, his ethical legacy still echoes. Whenever a physician says, "I will help," with clarity, humility, and restraint, they are living the oath. Whenever a patient entrusts their body, their pain, and their hope to another human being, they invoke the oath's sacred bond. And whenever humanity chooses to treat life not as a commodity, but as a profound responsibility, Hippocrates lives on. Part 6. The Corpus Hippocraticum. Foundations of Medical Science. Science begins with observation, medicine with the patient. Echoing Hippocratic principles. What is the Corpus Hippocraticum? The Corpus Hippocraticum, Hippocratic Corpusus, a monumental body of work that stands at the very foundation of Western medicine. Composed of approximately 60 treatises written in Ionic Greek, this collection was not the work of a single man, but of a school, a movement, a revolution initiated by Hippocrates and his intellectual descendants. Spanning topics from diet to prognosis, anatomy to ethics, epidemics to public health, the corpus reflects the spirit of rational inquiry and clinical observation that Hippocrates championed. It is not only a cornerstone of medical literature, but also a map of ancient knowledge, tracing the transition from mystical healing to empirical science. Diversity of style and authors. Modern historians agree that the corpus was not entirely written by Hippocrates himself. The texts vary in tone, terminology, and philosophy, suggesting multiple authors over decades, perhaps even centuries. These likely included students of the School of Kos, followers trained in the Hippocratic method, anonymous compilers from the later Hellenistic period. Despite this, the unifying thread is unmistakable: a commitment to clinical logic, natural causality, and ethical responsibility, all attributes pioneered by Hippocrates. Key treatises and their content. Let us explore some of the most significant works within the corpus. Aphorisms. One of the most quoted medical texts in history, The aphorisms are brief, memorable statements that capture clinical wisdom. Examples include: life is short, art long, opportunity fleeting, experience treacherous, judgment difficult. In desperate diseases, use desperate remedies. These statements were designed for memorization and transmission in early form of medical pedagogy. On airs, waters, and places. A groundbreaking treatise in environmental medicine, the author emphasizes how climate affects health, geography shapes disease patterns, occupation and lifestyle influence longevity. This text pioneered the study of epidemiology and public health centuries before germ theory. The sacred disease. Already discussed in Part 4, this work demystifies epilepsy and asserts a natural origin of disease, particularly centered in the brain. Prognostics. This work focuses not on curing illness, but on predicting its course through careful observation. It offers guidelines on how to places.org, Rejuencorg, monitor fever patterns, interpret discharges, observe respiration, detect crisis points in illnesses. It was revolutionary in encouraging long-term tracking of patient conditions. On regimen, a series of works advocating the role of diet, sleep, and daily habits in maintaining health. Hippocrates famously wrote, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." This holistic vision influenced both preventive medicine and modern nutritional therapy. On the physician. This short work addresses the appearance and behavior of the physician, recommending cleanliness, calm voice and manner, simplicity in dress, humility in bearing. The image of the doctor was to reflect not power, but trust and dignity. On fractures and on joints. Practical surgical manuals dealing with orthopedic issues. These texts provide descriptions of bone structure, reduction techniques for dislocations, splinting and bandaging methods. They represent the earliest medical technical manuals based on hands-on observation. An early scientific method, though Hippocrates never coined the phrase scientific method, the corpus reveals an approach strikingly similar. Observation of symptoms, recording data, pulse, color, excretions, temperature, analysis of patterns, prediction of disease course, prescriptive treatment, monitoring response. This structure predated modern clinical trials, but laid the groundwork for systematic medicine. Hippocratic authors demanded logic over tradition, evidence over theory, and results over reputation. Language of the corpus. The corpus is written in plain, accessible Greek, often in short, declarative sentences. It avoids poetic flourish or metaphysics. The authors speak with directness writing for physicians, not philosophers. This clarity made the corpus easier to translate, transmit, and teach, allowing its ideas to spread throughout the Hellenistic world, into Rome, across Islamic civilization, and eventually into Renaissance Europe. Global translations and survival. The corpus was translated into Latin by Roman scholars like Celsus and Galen, Syriac and Arabic by Islamic scholars such as Hunayn, Ibn Ishaq, Hebrew and Persian, later carried through the Middle Ages, French, German, and English during the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment period. Through each translation, the spirit of Hippocrates survived, healing as both science and service. The corpus versus modern medicine. While much of the information in the corpus is outdated, its value remains immense. It taught the world to seek patterns in illness. It emphasized the need to observe before acting. It promoted the individualization of care. It connected environment, mind, and body. These principles are echoed in modern medical curricula, even if the content has evolved. A living library. To this day, the corpus is studied in medical history departments, ethics courses, classical language studies, Global health institutions. It is one of the oldest medical libraries in human history and still among the most influential. A legacy of words. Few figures in history can claim to have shaped a profession for 2 millennia. Hippocrates did it not with war or politics, but with words, with the quiet clarity of observation and the steady hand of reason. The corpus is his monument not, carved in marble, but etched into every doctor's education, every patient's hope, and every textbook that begins, "In the beginning there was Hippocrates." Part 7. Life and Legacy. The Final Years of Hippocrates. Wherever the art of medicine is loved, there is also a love of humanity. Hippocrates, a physician among people. By the time Hippocrates reached his 60s, he was no longer merely a physician, he was a legend. His name was whispered with reverence from the islands of the Aegean to the cities of Asia Minor. His cures had become stories, his observations doctrine, and yet he remained a humble practitioner, walking among patients, visiting the sick, and recording symptoms in quiet defiance of mystical tradition. He did not build temples nor gather wealth. He did not seek political influence. What he sought was understanding of the human body, of disease, of healing, and to pass that understanding on. Unlike many thinkers of his time, he saw knowledge as communal, not proprietary. Teaching was as sacred to him as treating. Beyond Cos, travels and teaching. In his later years, Hippocrates is believed to have traveled extensively, though concrete details are blurred by myth and retelling. Records suggest he visited Thessaly, where he treated noble families and peasants alike, advised cities during plague outbreaks, offering preventative strategies based on geography and hygiene, lectured in Abdera, where philosopher Democritus reportedly lived in self-imposed seclusion. Hippocrates, instead of diagnosing madness, declared him wiser than all men, traveled to Athens, where his insights were sought during medical emergencies, and he was honored as a philosopher-physician. In all places, he taught the method more than the man. His focus was not on creating followers, but thinkers. He never demanded loyalty to his name only, to observation, logic, and compassion. The doctor's daily life. Descriptions from his students paint a picture of a modest but disciplined life, waking before sunrise, visiting patients across the island and mainland, eating simple meals, vegetables, olives, bread, and water, taking long walks to observe the environment and seasonal shifts, writing into the evening, recording symptoms, reflections, and treatment outcomes. He wore plain robes, avoided perfume or jewelry, and often reminded his students that a doctor must inspire trust, not awe. For Hippocrates, image was not a show of status, it was a reflection of humility and readiness to serve. The philosopher-physician, as he aged, Hippocrates found himself increasingly welcomed into philosophical circles, particularly among those in the tradition of Socrates and Democritus. Unlike the mystics or natural philosophers, Hippocrates rooted his thinking in biological realism. He taught that the soul and body were linked, but distinct. Emotions had physical consequences, e.g., grief leading to illness. Philosophy, stripped of practicality, was useless to the sick. Yet he appreciated the value of wisdom and sought conversations about ethics, human nature, and mortality. He once wrote, "A wise man should consider that health is the greatest of human blessings. Let food be your medicine, and medicine be your food." His philosophy was practical, holistic, and filled with an almost sacred respect for life. Students and successors. Hippocrates trained many students, some of whom became pioneers of their own schools. Among them, Polybus, believed to be Hippocrates' son-in-law, who preserved and expanded many texts, a generation of physicians who carried his methods to Macedonia, Thrace, and even Egypt, Early Roman doctors who studied his works centuries later, forming the medical foundation of the Republic and Empire, he did not insist on memorization of his own words. Instead, he urged students to record symptoms accurately, treat patients gently, adjust treatments to seasons and geography, maintain lifelong curiosity. In doing so, he planted seeds for centuries of medical inquiry. His final days. Little is known about the exact circumstances of Hippocrates' death. Ancient biographers offer conflicting accounts, placing his age anywhere between 83 and 109. What they all agree on is this: he died peacefully on the island of Larissa, or possibly back home on Kos, surrounded by his writings, his students, and the quiet admiration of an entire age. Unlike many ancient thinkers whose lives ended in exile or execution, Hippocrates was respected in life and revered in death. His burial and commemoration following his death, several shrines and tombs were reportedly established in his honor. The most famous site is the Asclepieion of Kos, which became a major center of healing and education in the ancient world. Pilgrims, patients, and young physicians traveled there to read his texts, study his case notes, reflect on his ethical teachings, walk the gardens where he once taught. Over the centuries, his tomb became a place of pilgrimage, not because of myth, but because of legacy. Remembered through history, after his death, Hippocrates was revered as a model of integrity and reason. In Rome, Galen called him the greatest of all physicians. In Islamic medicine, Avicenna referenced him as the first teacher of true healing. During the Renaissance, his works were retranslated and used as foundational texts in new European medical schools. In the modern era, his name is still spoken in every white coat ceremony, in every discussion of ethics, in every oath to serve patients without harm. His influence never vanished, it only evolved. A life without monuments. Hippocrates built no palace, conquered no city, and composed no hymns. His was a life lived in servitude to the sick, in partnership with truth, and in obedience to reason. He left behind not gold, but guidelines, not sons of power, but students of healing. His success was not measured in fame, but in the millions of lives touched through his ideas. Perhaps that is why his story endures, because it was never about himself, but about humanity's path to health. Part 8. Hippocrates after death. Influence through empires and eras. Time is the wisest of all counselors. Pericles. Hippocrates' wisdom, carried by time, became the cornerstone of global medicine. From Kos to Rome, the spread of a medical legacy. After Hippocrates' death, his influence spread far beyond the Aegean Islands. His students had already begun teaching across mainland Greece, and copies of his works meticulously transcribed were finding their way into the libraries of great cities. It was the Romans who first canonized Hippocrates as a foundational figure in medicine. Roman physicians, particularly in the early Republic and the imperial period, translated, copied, and commented on his writings. Among these figures, none carried the Hippocratic flame higher than Galen of Pergamon. Galen, the first true disciple. Galen, 129 c. 216 A.D., a Greek physician in Roman service, revered Hippocrates. He called him the divine Hippocrates, the guide of all who truly wish to heal. Though Galen would later add his own ideas to medicine, some of which proved inaccurate, his loyalty to the Hippocratic method of observation, reasoning, and ethical care remained unshaken. Galen preserved much of the Corpus Hippocraticum through his commentaries. His writings became required reading in Roman medical schools, ensuring that Hippocrates remained the gold standard of medical practice throughout the empire. Byzantium, the Eastern Guardian. As the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, much classical knowledge was lost to war, instability, and neglect. But in the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium Hippocrates' works survived. The Byzantines preserved Greek manuscripts of the corpus in imperial libraries, integrated Hippocratic teachings into military and palace hospitals, developed compendiums of ancient knowledge, where Hippocrates' name consistently held a central place. In this way, Constantinople became a bridge of transmission, keeping Hippocrates alive while Europe plunged into the Dark Ages. Islamic medicine, a new era of Hippocratic study. During the Islamic Golden Age, 8th, 13th centuries, scholars across the Middle East rediscovered and translated Hippocratic texts into Arabic. In Baghdad, the House of Wisdom became a hub for medical knowledge. There, scholars like Hunayn, Ibn Ishaq, and Razes studied, translated, and built upon Hippocratic works. Hippocrates was referred to as Bukrat in Arabic and was held in the highest regard. His ideas were often cited alongside Galen, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, Dioscorides, Aristotle. Islamic hospitals adopted Hippocratic principles: patient observation, ethical conduct, environmental health, and the importance of physician humility. These hospitals, organized, clean, and publicly funded, represented the spiritual continuation of the school of Kos. The Renaissance, a resurrection in the West. By the 14th and 15th centuries, Europe began to emerge from the Middle Ages. With the invention of the printing press and the renewed study of classical texts, Hippocrates was reborn in the minds of Western physicians and philosophers. Latin and Greek editions of the Corpus Hippocraticum were published and circulated throughout Italy, France, England, and Germany. Medical students studied Hippocrates at the University of Padua, Montpellier, and Oxford. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci studied human anatomy using Hippocratic logic. Thinkers like Paracelsus challenged Galenic dogma, but acknowledged Hippocrates as a scientific forerunner. The Renaissance humanists saw in Hippocrates a model of rationality, virtue, and intellectual honesty. Modern medicine, revisiting and reinterpreting Hippocrates. With the rise of scientific medicine in the 18th and 19th centuries, some aspects of Hippocratic theory like the four humors were discarded, yet the essence of his legacy remained. Observation became the foundation of clinical diagnosis. Ethics evolved into medical professionalism and legal standards. Case histories inspired the modern practice of detailed patient records. Environmental health ideas re-emerged in public health and epidemiology. Today, Hippocrates is often viewed not as a source of factual science, but as the father of methodology, pioneer of reasoned thinking in medicine. In medical schools around the globe. Every year, in medical schools across continents, graduating students take some version of the Hippocratic Oath. Though modernized, it still carries his core values. Donner arm, treat with dignity, respect patient confidentiality, commit to lifelong learning, serve for the sake of humanity. His name is etched on university buildings, textbooks, and diplomas. His likeness is carved in statues in Boston, Paris, Vienna, Beijing, and New Delhi. Though centuries old, Hippocrates continues to welcome every new physician into the sacred art of healing. The symbol of global ethics. In an increasingly globalized world, the ethical dilemmas of medicine euthanasia, AI diagnosis, resource allocation grow more complex, and yet Hippocrates remains a moral touchstone. The World Medical Association's Declaration of Geneva, first written in 1948 and regularly updated, draws from the spirit of Hippocrates. Humanitarian doctors in war zones, public health workers in refugee camps, rural nurses in low-income countries invoke Hippocratic values when putting patients first, withholding judgment, upholding dignity, speaking truth to power in defense of health, a lens for the future. In the 21st century, medicine faces unprecedented challenges. genetic editing, artificial intelligence, climate-linked health crises, global pandemics, ethical biotechnology. Though these developments would have seemed unthinkable in his time, Hippocrates' voice still whispers in our ears. Observe carefully, act ethically, treat holistically. His principles are not relics, they are lenses through which modern medicine can find its human face. Part 9. Philosophy and Humanity, the Soul of Hippocratic Medicine. Wherever the art of medicine is loved, there is also a love of humanity. Hippocrates. Beyond technique, the humanist physician, while Hippocrates was a man of science and observation, he was equally a man of ethics, empathy, and humility. He saw the human being not just as a biological entity, but as a living soul with feelings, fears, and personal dignity. To Hippocrates, a doctor who healed only the body and ignored the spirit was no healer at all. He championed the idea that the practice of medicine was an act of compassion, not merely a profession or technical endeavor. This dual devotion to science and solace what elevated him above his peers and made his influence endure across civilizations. The nature of suffering, Hippocrates was among the first in recorded history to treat suffering as a natural, understandable human experience, not a divine punishment. He taught that pain had physical causes, often identifiable. Mental distress could affect the body and vice versa. Grief, worry, and fear could alter appetite, sleep, digestion, and energy. Healing required listening, not just prescribing. In his practice, he would often sit silently by a patient's bed not to recite prayers, but to observe breathing, hear their story, feel their pulse, sense their anxiety. This approach birthed bedside medicine, a cornerstone of modern clinical practice. The role of the physician as counselor. In the Corpus Hippocraticum, physicians are often described not just as healers, but as guides and counselors. Hippocrates believed a physician must know how to calm a patient's mind, must know when to speak and when to remain silent, must support the family, explain outcomes, and prepare for death when necessary. Above all, must be a trusted presence. This emotional burden, the quiet suffering of the healer, was something Hippocrates accepted with grace. He wrote, "Healing is a matter of time, but it is sometimes also a matter of opportunity." To seize that opportunity meant knowing not just what to do, but how and when to do, ethically, respectfully, patiently, the patient as a whole person. Hippocrates treated his patients as whole beings, not just collections of symptoms. He believed that illness was often a result of imbalances in lifestyle, such as improper food, lack of exercise, or poor air. Emotional and environmental factors directly influenced health. A person's temperament, habits, occupation, and even family relationships were relevant to diagnosis and treatment. This holistic view was rare in a world still bound to mysticism and fragmented understanding of the human body. His legacy: treat the person, not just the disease. Time, seasons, and nature. Hippocratic medicine emphasized timing. Physicians were taught to respect the rhythm of nature, to treat according to the seasons, and to understand that some illnesses resolve best through patient waiting rather than intervention. Time is that in which there is opportunity, and opportunity is that in which there is not much time. This ancient wisdom reminds modern medicine of a key lesson. Not all healing is immediate. Sometimes the doctor's art is to wait and watch, to let nature do her work, and to act only when the moment is right. The moral character of the physician. Hippocrates placed profound emphasis on the character of the physician: honest, modest, temperate in lifestyle, respectful of boundaries, committed to learning. He warned against arrogance, greed, and sensationalism. A true physician, he believed, must be a mirror of ethical strength, because the sick place their lives, their secrets, their dignity in his hands. Such responsibility, he taught, was sacred. Words as medicine. Hippocrates believed in the healing power of words. He trained students to speak clearly, offer realistic hope, avoid false promises, be present even in silence. He recognized the psychological benefit of the doctor's confidence, calmness, and care. A kind tone, a steady hand, and quiet assurance could, in his view, ease suffering as much as any herb or poultice. Death and dignity. While many in ancient times sought to hide death, Hippocrates faced it directly. He acknowledged that not all diseases could be cured. Death was part of life. The physician's duty was not to prevent death at all costs, but to minimize suffering, extend life where possible, and prepare patients and families when death came. He helped shift medicine from heroic intervention to compassionate care. The physician was to be a witness to mortality, not a denier of it. Healing as a moral art. Hippocrates referred to medicine as a technia, Greek term meaning art, but also craft, discipline, and virtue. Healing, in his mind, was not simply a skill to be mastered, but a moral vocation. His legacy reminds us, medicine is humanistic science. The patient is not a case, but a story. Healing begins with listening. The physician is, above all, a servant of life, the universal healer. In a world divided by language, religion, and wealth, Hippocrates spoke to a universal truth, that every human being deserves care, dignity, and understanding. His words resonate still in every clinic, refugee camp, and hospital bed. He taught us that true medicine is not only found in laboratories or manuals, but in the presence of a good physician, standing quietly at a patient's side, embodying science, compassion, and hope. Part 10. The Myth and the Man, Separating Legend from History. When a name becomes eternal, it risks becoming a myth, but the truth of Hippocrates is even greater than the legend, a name whispered through centuries. Few figures in history have achieved such lasting reverence as Hippocrates of Kos. His name has been passed down through temples, scrolls, manuscripts, and medical oaths for more than 2,000 years. But over time, the real man has become blurred by hagiography, historical gaps, and symbolic uses. Like Socrates or Confucius, Hippocrates became more than a man. He became a standard, a symbol, and a story. So who was Hippocrates really, and how much of what we say today is fact, and how much is fiction? The real historical evidence. What do we truly know about Hippocrates? He was born around 460 BCE, likely on the island of Kos, into a family of Asclepiad healers. He lived through the height of classical Greece, witnessing the Peloponnesian War, the rise of Athens, and the life of Socrates. He likely traveled, taught, practiced medicine, and wrote or inspired others to write. He probably died around 370 BCE, at a very advanced age for his time. Most surviving information comes not from direct records, but from later historians, such as Soranus of Ephesus, 2nd century CE, who wrote a biography of Hippocrates, Galen, who referenced him extensively, Arabic and Byzantine compilers, who preserved and revered his image. These later sources idealized Hippocrates, but also preserved core truths about his approach, philosophy, and ethical influence. The legendary stories. As the centuries passed, myths grew around Hippocrates. Some were likely exaggerated. Others were invented to reflect his ideal character. Among the most famous tales, that he refused gifts from kings and chose instead to treat the poor, that he cured the plague of Athens when other physicians fled, that he declared philosopher Democritus sane when others called him mad, that he was offered great riches by the Persian king Artaxerxes, but declined, choosing loyalty to Greece, that he lived to be 109 years old, These stories reflect values more than facts. They depict Hippocrates as a model of virtue, restraint, patriotism, and wisdom. Whether literal or metaphorical, they played a role in shaping the archetype of the noble physician. The name as a symbol, over time, Hippocrates became a concept more than a person. In literature, politics, and medicine, invoking his name meant invoking integrity, rationality, scientific honesty, ethical purity, dedication to service. His name became a shield against corruption, a standard to aspire to, and sometimes even a weapon against those who violated medical ethics. Doctors accused of malpractice were said to have betrayed Hippocrates. Students were reminded to live up to Hippocrates. In courts and councils, his image was used to support arguments for truth in healing. Misuses and misinterpretations. Like many revered figures, Hippocrates' name has also been misused. Some examples. In medieval times, unlicensed healers invoked his name to gain legitimacy. In the 19th century, some falsely attributed their homeopathic or pseudoscientific theories to Hippocratic roots. Selective readings of the oath were used to support rigid anti-abortion or anti-euthanasia positions, even though historical context was often ignored. Politicians and organizations occasionally referenced Hippocratic duty while advancing non-medical agendas. These misuses often oversimplify or distort the flexible, observational spirit that defined Hippocrates. The real legacy. Method, not dogma. Perhaps the greatest misunderstanding about Hippocrates is to treat him as a doctrine maker, someone who issued rules to be followed blindly. But in truth, he was a liberator. He freed medicine from mysticism. He opened the door to individualized care. He championed reason over ritual, ethics over power, and compassion over hierarchy. His true legacy is not a set of rules, but a method of inquiry. Observe, think, ask, listen, treat humanely, continue learning. This flexible, responsive method is far more modern than many assume. Historical skepticism and reappraisal. In modern academic circles, there has been a push to demythologize Hippocrates. Scholars carefully differentiate between what he may have written, what was likely written by others, what is purely symbolic or legendary, but this process has not diminished his greatness. Rather, it has clarified it. It has shown that even if Hippocrates did not write every line, his ideas, values, and methods created a movement that transformed medicine forever. The enduring truth in the legend. Legends are often born from our collective hopes. We make heroes of those whose values we cherish. In Hippocrates, humanity found a man whose life echoed some of its highest aspirations: knowledge without arrogance, service without greed, healing without judgment, wisdom without ego. Whether every story about him is true is less important than the fact that his example shaped history. In a world still learning to balance science with soul, Hippocrates remains our first great teacher. Between history and hope, Hippocrates exists on the line between what was and what we wish could be. He was real. He was flawed. He was brilliant. He was human. But through centuries of storytelling, reinterpretation, and cultural reverence, he became something more: a moral compass, a symbol of healing, a reminder of what medicine should always strive to be. Not perfect, but present. Not all-knowing, but always listening. Part 11. The Eternal Flame, Hippocrates in the 21st century and beyond. The physician must have two special objects in view with regard to disease, namely, to do good or to do no harm. Hippocrates. The new landscape of medicine. The 21st century has brought revolutions Hippocrates could never have imagined. Genomic sequencing can now predict disease before symptoms emerge. Artificial intelligence helps diagnose faster than any human mind. Robotic surgery, telemedicine, organ printing, and nanotechnology are no longer science fiction, they are reality. Global pandemics, climate-linked health crises, and mental health epidemics have redrawn the map of public health. And yet, in this world of transformation, one question remains vital. What would Hippocrates say now? Do no harm? In an age of speed, the ancient maxim, first do no harm, may be more difficult and more important than ever before. In a time of overprescription, overdiagnosis, algorithmic decision-making, biased data, and unintended AI harm, the Hippocratic warning rings true. Hippocrates taught caution, observation, and personalized treatment. He reminds us that speed must never replace safety, and that technological power must always be guided by ethical judgment. The patient in a digital age, as medicine becomes more digital smartwatches, online records, remote monitoring the doctor-patient relationship is evolving. Yet Hippocrates reminds us the patient is not a data point. Healing requires empathy, not just evidence. Trust cannot be downloaded, it must be earned. He taught that a physician's presence, tone, listening ear, and steady hand are sometimes as healing as the prescription itself. In the 21st century, this is not outdated, it's revolutionary. Medical ethics on new frontiers. Today's physicians face ethical questions Hippocrates never imagined. Should we edit the genes of unborn children? Who owns patient data? Should AI make life and death decisions? Can we create synthetic consciousness? Who receives scarce resources in a crisis? While the oath doesn't offer direct answers, Hippocratic principles do. Prioritize human dignity. Avoid harm. Be honest about limits. Treat each life with equal value. Remember that medicine is about the person, not the procedure. Global health and the call to serve in a world of inequality. Hippocratic values challenge us to provide care regardless of race, class, gender, or border. Address social determinants of health: clean water, food, shelter. Fight for access to medicine in remote and impoverished areas. Treat refugees, prisoners, and the displaced with equal compassion. The humanist foundation laid by Hippocrates calls every healthcare worker to be not just a technician, but an advocate. Climate and planetary health. As global warming drives disease, displaces populations, and destroys food systems, medicine must broaden its lens. Doctors today are asked to treat not just individuals, but environments. Hippocrates, in On Airs, Waters, and Places, taught that physicians must consider the seasons of the year, the winds, the waters, the habits of the inhabitants. His words echo in modern climate medicine, reminding us that the health of the body depends on the health of the earth. Artificial intelligence and human intuition. Artificial intelligence can now read radiology scans, detect patterns invisible to human eyes, predict risks from massive data sets, but Hippocrates reminds us of what AI cannot do. Hold a trembling hand. Understand unspoken pain. Offer hope when the prognosis is grim. Act with moral courage when the system says otherwise. In the balance between machine learning and human learning, Hippocrates still tips the scale toward humanity. The future doctor, a harmonizer. The physician of the future must be a scientist grounded in biology and evidence, a technologist able to work with machines and data, a communicator skilled in empathy and explanation, a philosopher asking, should we, as much as can we, an advocate standing for those without voice or access. This role was envisioned long ago by a man from Kos, who said that medicine must be learned with love, practiced with humility, and wielded with virtue. Hippocrates as a living legacy. Hippocrates is not just a name etched in statues. He lives on In every ethical debate in a hospital boardroom, in every quiet conversation between a doctor and a dying patient, in every student who takes an oath on their first day of medical school, in every policy that centers care over commerce, in every innovation that preserves life and dignity, he lives on wherever medicine remembers its soul, the flame that never dies. We end not with a statue, but with a flame that burns in the hearts of healers, the minds of scientists, the conscience of ethics committees, the mission of health systems, the trust between patient and provider. This flame Hippocratic in Spirithos burned through wars, empires, and revolutions, and it will burn still long after our tools change again. So long as medicine asks not only how can we heal, but also why must we heal, Hippocrates' Lives.